Long, long ago, the New Kingdom, pretty much the golden era of the history of Egypt, started in 1550 BC after the so-called Hyksos were driven out of their land. The following rulers expanded the kingdom into a fully blown empire by adding Nubia and some parts of West Asia. The one responsible for such empire was the Pharaoh Thutmose I, but by the end of the 16th century BC, he needed an heir. Between 1508 and 1504, having married the royal queen Ahmose, who was probably his sister, by the way, he had a daughter called Hatshepsut, whose name means the foremost of distinguished women. That is a needlessly fancy name. He had more children with the royal queen, but they all passed away at early age, the kind of reason we don't do inbreeding these days. Thing is, he had a boy with a different woman, making the latter into a lesser son, needing to become a legitimate heir to inherit the throne and being the only male one who was left. The boy and his half-sister Hatshepsut were pressured into marrying each other, making the former into the Pharaoh Thutmose II in 1493 BC. Hatshepsut had a strong influence over him during his rule. We don't know exactly in which way, only that she acquired a lot of knowledge about the art of ruling over their land. He had a daughter together with Hatshepsut, but he would go on to have a son with a different woman, making this one into his only male heir. After a reign that was, according to the lack of socio-economical and military achievements, very much mid. Although being fair, it seems like it was due to him being either too young or too sick. Passed away in 1479 BC at the age of 31. And so, Thutmose III, his son, was officialized as the Pharaoh of Egypt at the young age of 3, perfectly fit to rule over an empire, as you can imagine. Since Hatshepsut was the daughter of a pharaoh, the sister and wife of another pharaoh, and even the adoptive mother of a third pharaoh, from the eyes of her people, she was pretty much legit. So yeah, she ruled as co-regent of the nation, while Thutmose was just a kid, following traditions. The following 7 years gave her a lot of experience in the field of, ruling over an empire, and we don't know why or how, but in 1472 BC, she prepared to become the Pharaoh of Egypt, not usurping the throne, but becoming the main ruler besides her 10-year-old stepson, whom she treated as her very own son. Part of the reason she was able to claim the throne was because of recruiting very influential people to support her in exchange of resources, positions, and honor. For example, Hatshepsut, the high priest of Amun, also an overseer and chancellor. Many of them had previously worked for her father, Thutmose I, or even were veteran generals that no one wanted to argue with. One of the most important ones was her architect and advisor, Senmut, who many theorize soon became her lover. But many Egyptologists debate this because there is not enough evidence, and the argument is that he had loads of privileges. But really, that makes us think that he just had the pharaoh's trust. Her insane levels of legitimacy compensated for the prejudice that her sex presented, and to reduce such prejudice, she actually changed her name to a male version, Hatshepsut, without the T in the end, since there wasn't a word, title, or name for a female pharaoh or any kind of queen regnant in ancient Egypt. And if that wasn't enough, she claimed that the day she was conceived, Amun, the Egyptian god of wind and creation, took the form of her father, getting her mom pregnant. So technically, she was the daughter of the god Amun himself. If this reminds you of something, it's not a coincidence. Remember that the story you're thinking about was written 1400 years after this, and this divine nature was probably an explanation for why she was able to survive childhood unlike her siblings and remain healthy when even her husband passed away from disease. Which is fair, cause even I'm surprised that she survived infancy despite the inbreeding. Her throne name was Matkare, which means Mat, the goddess of truth, is the life force of Ra, the god of the sun, and you know that she will carve this name in the king list right after Thutmose III, her adopted son, because this will be important later on. To assert her rule, Matkare wore the genuine male garments of a pharaoh, including the fake beard, even omitting her breasts in our depictions. Alright everyone, here we have it, the first cross-dresser. Male Egyptians didn't usually rock beards or actual long hair to prevent the pests that could hide between the hairs. The fake versions of the monarchs were to look similar to the gods who had such characteristics to signify the status of a pharaoh as a living god, combining the most pronounced male and female features into a sort of perfect being, similar to the hermaphrodite rebus from alchemy. Her dressing as a man was no joke. As a matter of fact, the archaeologist Jean-François Champollion, the guy who deciphered the Egyptian writing system thanks to Napoleon discovering the Rosetta Stone, was completely sure that this was a man until he deciphered the hieroglyphs next to it, which were using female titles, making him very confused. Imagine reading that a guy was the foremost of distinguished women. What? This was not disingenuous, by the way. Her people knew she was a lady. She actually described herself in carvings as a beautiful woman, sometimes even as the most beautiful woman. I guess having a big ego is not exclusively a guy thing, am I right? She also refused to use the traditional title of the Strong Bull for understandable reasons. She was the first woman to be crowned as pharaoh, although not the first one to be a full-blown queen regnant, because Sobekneferu did it first in the Middle Kingdom and possibly Merneith or Nitocris in the Old Kingdom. Her remarkable feats do not start with a blessing or with a talent or anything like that, but rather with a limitation, and such limitation was the fact that it was inconceivable for Egyptian society for a woman to lead the armies into battle, so military feats were out of the question for her. So she was like, hey guys, what if we focus in making money? First of all, she resumed the trade networks that had been cut because of the Hyksos occupation of Egypt and were not properly re-established due to the constant warfare that many Egyptians seemed to be addicted to. She prepared, funded, and sent her army for a bit of a vacation to the legendary land of Punt in the southeast, somewhere between Eritrea and Somalia, not for the sake of conflict, but of trade. It was 5 ships that were 70 feet long, or 21 meters in normal, carrying 210 people each. The result of the expedition was incredible. They came back with a lot of good stuff. First of all, myrrh, which is believed to have been her favorite perfume. A lady has priorities, okay? They brought 31 frankincense trees alive in baskets, leading to the oldest recorded iteration of a replanting of trees from a foreign land in the courts of her temple. If you're wondering if the frankincense had another use, yes it did. It could be cooked and grinded to make eyeliner. I did say a lady has priorities. And last but not least, they brought food, ivory, and gold, loads of gold. There are signs of military campaigns going to Nubia, the Levant, and Syria during her reign, despite the fact that many claim that her foreign policy was mostly peaceful. But who knows, maybe they weren't that big of a thing, or were used to consolidate or defend. The shift of focusing less in violence and more so in commerce was exactly what Egypt needed at the time, increasing overall prosperity, giving her a rise in popularity, and also the opportunity to focus in one of her favorite pastimes, playing Minecraft in real life apparently. She was responsible for the twin obelisks from the Temple of Amun in Karna, which were the biggest in the world at the time. Although one of them snapped in two, the other one is the tallest surviving ancient obelisk in the planet. But her absolute masterpiece, designed by Senmut, was the Djeser Djeseru, or Sublime of Sublimes, which it was, or rather is, because this triple-terraced, perfectly even bad boy stands in full glory to this day. 3,500 years later, it was colonnaded in a way that is reminiscent of the Parthenon, except it was built almost an entire millennium before the Greek one. In its former glory, it was surrounded by the previously mentioned foreign trees, plus some other cool stuff like the golden peaks of the obelisks. Her descendants attempted to emulate her style, making their very own temples, but of course they were not nearly at the same level. And as a matter of fact, the Djeser Djeseru is the only one that survives, so no wonder she is considered one of the most proficient builders of ancient Egypt. The Minecraft thing was not really a joke. I think if she were alive today, she would be playing that. But in the ancient world, people didn't last very long, so she passed away at around the age of 50 in 1457 BC, in the year 22 since the passing of her husband, Thutmose II, the same year as the Battle of Megiddo, by the way. Her mummy hasn't been exactly defined, but one from a cave called V60 is assumed to be her, due to matching the mummy with a tooth from a box that was right next to it and had her name on it. It has signs of bone issues and a mouth infection, so maybe the latter is the reason of her passing. And you might be wondering, why was she so hard to find? Well, that's a good question. Thutmose III assumed the role of full-blown pharaoh right after her, and is believed to have been the one responsible for destroying the faces of many of her statues, removing her from historical records, and erasing most of the evidence of his mother being a pharaoh. The motivations are debated, like resentment for not being able to become pharaoh until she passed away, but he could have easily deposed her with the use of the military, who probably didn't really like Hatshepsut that much. A commonly accepted one is that since her rise to power was really weird and it seemed like she usurped it, he had to make sure that he was a direct patriarchal continuation of his father's rule in a traditional manner. So yeah, he replaced his mother's name with that of his son Amenhotep II in the king list. Even I could theorize more reasons myself, since Thutmose III was using the same regnal years as his mother, as in 22 years since the death of Thutmose II, so leaving Hatshepsut on the king list would have limited the potential of him being remembered for a very long and prosperous reign, and possibly even expropriating his mom's achievements and keeping them for his own. We should be grateful that we even get to know about her at all, considering all of the efforts trying to delete her from ancient Wikipedia, and she has been deservedly recognized in the last century, including the book Hatshepsut by Evelyn Wells, who calls her the first great woman in history. And how could she not? Although the Sumerian Puabi and Merneith from the Old Kingdom might be better candidates, it is true that her efforts on focusing in the economy and commerce became the freaking spinal cord of the Egyptian economy, heavily contributing to the golden age of the 3,100 years of pharaonic Egypt, which was followed by the most brutal and violent of them all, Thutmose III, but he will be a topic for another video. One last note, all of the dates given today are based off the low chronology, and they are highly debated due to their ancient nature. Differences in chronologies and durations of reign, which are also contested, will put her becoming co-regent of Thutmose between 1512 and 1479 BC, and the date of her passing between 1483 and 1457 BC. Alright, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe, leave a comment. Guess what? It helps a lot with the algorithm actually. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Ciao!